Good evening, guten Abend, buonasera, guten Nachmittag nach Österreich, aus dem Außenwirtschaftscenter Österreich hier in Bukarest. Wir befinden uns in Rumänien. Wir machen heute ein Webinar. Ich darf eine kurze Einführung auch in deutscher Sprache geben. Das Webinar selbst wird in englischer Sprache sein und ich beginne ganz kurz in deutscher Sprache. Es freut mich sehr, alle Zuseher heute bei uns zu haben. Wir haben sehr zahlreiche Zuseher. Wir haben heute ein sehr großes Interesse an dem Thema. Das Thema ist sozusagen über die Entwicklung Rumäniens, über die wirtschaftliche Entwicklung, auch die gesamte Entwicklung Europas. We asked whether there is stormy times ahead in the economic development of Romania. And so we were talking about, is there a Brexit? Is there no Brexit? Will a Brexit ever happen? There is shaky times right now in economic terms, in macroeconomic terms. So the inflation rate, the budget, the debt, the trade balance, the currency exchange rate, and so on, are going up and down, and that was kind of what interested us very much. So we said there is times of uncertainty, and talking about times of uncertainty, you might have also some technical uncertainty out there. For the technical uncertainty, please be aware that we have a webinar. You have a panel in front of you, and in the panel you will see a chat box. In the chat box, you can ask us questions. So you can ask questions anytime. Sie können uns jederzeit Fragen stellen, ist überhaupt kein Problem. In der Chatbox, die Sie haben, können Sie uns die Fragen stellen. Sie haben auch eine Chatbox zu den Organisatoren. Das heißt, auch technische Fragen können Sie uns auf diese Art und Weise stellen. So also, if you're experiencing technical difficulties, please feel free to use the chatbox and to enter the question that you have if your sound doesn't work or if the video doesn't work at all. Well, if you missed the sequence, if you have to leave early today, or if someone comes in a bit late, that's not a problem at all. The whole video is going to be recorded, and the video is going to go up on our YouTube channel at the Außenwirtschaft Austria YouTube channel. You can also watch it there afterwards. And not only that, we're also going to send out the presentation afterwards. So you will have a presentation from all the speakers, the 4 speakers who prepared a certain set of data for you afterwards on our website, and we will send that out. So at the end of every speaker, we will have a keynote speaker, and then every chief economist will have the opportunity to speak to us. At the end of each speech, I will show a slide, and we will start up a discussion. Feel free to get into the discussion as well via your chat box. Ask the questions. We will see the questions, and we can answer on those. I might want to introduce now our speakers. And I would like to start up with Anca Negrescu. Anca Negrescu is the macroeconomic and strategic planning vice president with UniCredit Bank. Has been here for quite some time in Romania, and we're very happy to have you here 1 week before your maternity leave. Thanks very much for joining in with us today. Second with us is Horia Braun-Erdei. Horia is the chief economist and the research director of Banca Comercială Romana. Banca Comercială Romana is the subsidiary of Erste Bank from Austria. Thanks very much for joining in today. Yeah, and we won a keynote speaker we're really happy about, because we already heard him speak ourselves, and he's got very interesting statements for us. The keynote speaker today will be Cătălin Păună. Cătălin Păună is with the World Bank, and he will give us kind of the macroeconomic meta view on the situation right now. Last but not least, we also do have with us Laurian Lungu. Laurian Lungu is the economic advisor of OMV Petrom, and is also the co-founder of the think tank Consilium Policy Advisors Group. We hope that Laurian Lungu will be able to give us much more of an insight into what is the business environment that a company needs, and what does the macroeconomic environment mean for that. If we go into this, we will see that in Romania, right now, we have kind of, in the word cloud, a lot of words that everybody of you already saw. We have the word infrastructure in there. We will talk about infrastructure later on. Is there enough infrastructure investments? Actually, to take it ahead a bit, it's at a 10-year low right now. And we have a lot of talks about the RON, as you see in the middle of the word cloud. The RON, the foreign currency exchange rate, is fluctuating a bit. It's devaluating a bit. We will also talk about that. Government is a big topic. And one topic that I have in there is always qualified personnel, dual education. And on the other hand, we also have productivity there. I guess productivity is one of the issues where Romania could develop the most. Yeah, just for me, giving a kind of macroeconomic view on the Austrian-Romanian bilateral trade between 2008 and 2018, we see that the development in 2008, 9, 10, in the crisis and after the crisis, was quite difficult. At the time, there was a big hype, the big investment hype, and after that, more or less the machinery and equipment in imports and investments went down a lot and never recovered from there, but have been at a very good level. But what the chart shows right now is that at the end of everything, so in 2018, Austria reached a new all-time high in exports to Romania, plus the bilateral trade that we reached is over 4 billion euros. And that was a really great achievement. Also, the imports from Romania to Austria were very strong. As compared to many other Eastern European countries, Austrian companies in exports and imports do not export to the production facilities and then import the products back with a value added. Romania is a really good domestic and export market for Austrian companies. So saying so much, I think that we should hand over now, and I ask Katalin Pauna to join me here on the panel and to take the floor. Katalin Pauna, thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure.
And please feel free to take the floor and give us an insight.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Katalin Pauna. I'm the economist of the World Bank, and I've been with my employer for like 18 years, covering mostly Romania. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I know that I have a relatively short time to actually convey a few messages, like 10 minutes. So therefore, I'll prepare only a short presentation, only 2+1 slides. Let me start. So this is the first slide, looking a bit at the global and the European economic context, since I've been asked to put Romania in a bit of a broader context. And here, what I project here is the GDP growth rates for a number of leading countries as they come out in the latest World Economic Outlook of the IMF. I think that the IMF, you may know, they've just launched last week this World Economic Outlook, and I think they make an articulate presentation about growth. So what they say there is that what everybody sees probably, that growth is actually weakening, which started in the second half of last year, but also they expect a bottoming up ideally in the first half of this year before a rebound takes place. So if you see at the projections for 2020, in most of the cases they are higher than for 2019. So they don't really see a serious slowdown in the world economic activity. So more likely, advanced economies are expected to settle in the long-term growth potential, although with a significant variation across countries. And Germany, if you look at Germany in particular, you see a significant slowdown this year, and I think the latest high-frequency data coming out tend to point that. Lower, the IMF sees a rebound and quite a solid one in 2020, mostly towards long-term potential. So clearly, this is a period of heightened uncertainty. So I think we should take all this. These figures with the margin of error, and to articulate that, I put in the last two columns the differences in the IMF projections from January to April. So you can see that in the interval of 3 months already, there have been significant adjustments for 2019, not so much for 2020. On the positive side, I think that given the significant fiscal adjustments which we've seen occurring throughout the world in the last 7-8 years, I think there is room for policy stimulation. And so ECB has room. We've seen some movements on the Bank of Japan side, Bank of England. We've seen the Fed stopping the hikes. So clearly, I think there is scope, given where the deficits are in Europe, there is scope for governments intervening to prop up the economy, if that will be the case. We also see a bit of improvement in the sentiment towards emerging markets. So a slight pickup in the inflows again, flows to the emerging market, again with variation from country to country. So there are emerging markets that continue to suffer, Turkey, Argentina, and possibly others, but that's not the case around the globe. I put all this context here because Romania is highly dependent on the prospects of the European Union. So if if Europe, let's say, coughs, then I think Romania catches the sick. And this is because Romania is highly integrated in European economic structures to a number of channels, including the banking channel. So most of the banks here are actually subsidiaries or branches of the European banks, also through the trade channels. So more than 70% of Romania's exports versus imports also go and come to the European Union, and also through the labor market channel. As you all know, Romania has a large population, working age population, which has emigrated mostly to European countries, so keeping some important linkages, including in terms of remittances with the country of origin. So this is the global context, probably not as bleak as others may see it, but again, with some variation depending on whom you ask. Moving to Romania, these are put there 3 projections. I didn't put the private sector because my colleagues will come and they will probably give you their perspective. I'm on the optimistic side overall, I have to say, so I think I'm sure they will come up with probably worse figures. But I think that it's also important to look at the bright side of the picture as well, to the extent there is one. So clearly what we see from high frequency and what we've seen happening in the last months of last year, growth is slowing down in Romania. And you have there a number of estimates for this year. The most pessimistic is the IMF 3.1. The most optimistic is European Commission, where somewhere in between, still a robust growth we're projecting, but probably with risk on the downside. Remember that timing matters. So a few months ago, we could have been probably a bit more optimistic. These months have shaped probably a few percentage points as well, but not that many. So if you look at the high frequency indicator, again, you get a mixed picture, feature. You can see growth indeed probably slowing down, but not that dramatically. Probably the most important challenge this year is managing the fiscal pressure, because if this growth rate will actually materialize, you may know that the budget has been built on a more optimistic macro framework. So clearly, this would leave a gap in the budget, which would have to be filled in somehow. It is difficult to believe that important changing may happen for the rest of the year, probably on the revenue side. So maybe one could look at possible adjustments on the expenditure side. There is, at this stage, we believe there is little room for a potential fiscal stimulus, because fiscal policy has been pro-cyclical since 2016. So we don't really see some space for a significant adjustment should that be needed. But that's traditionally the case. Historically speaking, Romania runs, and not Romania, 90% of the emerging markets run pro-cyclical fiscal policy. So they start on the wrong footing, the trough of the cycle, and then it's difficult to correct. So they take exactly the opposite measures that you should not take in a downturn. On the inflation side, we see endemic, but we believe manageable inflationary pressures. The question is whether inflation has not already peaked. Somewhere we estimate probably an average of 3.5%. Maybe it was the same figure. So the upper margin of the central bank. And if we look at fiscal policy as well as income policies, I think they continue to run strong. So I think that I don't expect personally a dramatic decline in consumption. So therefore, if you look at, for example, at wages, so wages, we have fantastic increases, spectacular increase in wages for better or for worse. So wages grow currently at around 17%, pulled by the wages actually in the public sector, which actually run by 27-28%. So we have incredible figures there, which would keep probably the domestic demand, disposable incomes going. Dynamics in the labor market also stimulate demand. So we have a tremendous shortage of labor, both for skilled and unskilled, and I think this is going to be one of the major problems of Romania for the medium and long term. We also see unemployment at historically low figures, and as I said earlier, also some further injections of fiscal stimulus, small ones like increasing in pensions, cannot be ruled out. In fact, I think there is a pension increase planned for September. So all in all, if we believe that there will be a slowdown in the economy, but we still believe that there will be a relatively robust domestic demand, we expect further deterioration of the current account balance. So imports growing faster. So the driver is actually is the trade balance. Imports growing faster than exports. On the export side, we've seen a rather slowdown, which I think it's attributable primarily to two factors. One is diminishing marginal returns. If you want, we have not seen major significant investments recently in the Romanian economy. So a big chunk of the export is concentrated in a limited number of areas like the automotive and related industry. So they cannot really have the same spectacular increases which we've seen occurring, let's say, in the last 5-7 years. But at the same time, we see a weakening. If we see a weakening of the consumer sentiment in the destination countries, primarily in the European Union, it's normal to expect a kind of slowdown, all else equal. All in all, if we have this likely continuing endemic inflationary pressures, we have the deterioration of the current account balance, and we have fiscal pressures. The pressure on the currency, I think, is here to stay. So we don't see, my expectation is not of a dramatic significant depreciation of the currency, but I think that that would be the trend. Of course, the way that the central bank will react is very important. The banking sector, we see now, it's in a liquidity deficit position. I think that will continue for a while, but it is questionable at this stage whether that kind of policy conduct of the central bank would be enough to tame inflation and bring it down within the limits envisaged by the monetary authority in the absence of additional hikes in the policy rate. So that's the overall picture. Let me conclude on a positive statement. So what I put there is it's the GDP per capita in a selected number of countries relative to the EU 28 average at purchasing power standard. So you have the trajectory of a number of countries since 2000, the last 19 years. So we have two positive stories there. One is Romania, clearly. So you see the convergence of Romania over this period, I think, has been spectacular. So if you look at where Romania was in 2000, 25% of the EU 28 average, now it's over 65% and hopefully growing. So I think this is overall a positive picture. It has not been linear, of course. There have been ups and downs and so on, but overall, I think this is spectacular. So Romania is catching up with the rest of Europe. We've seen a decoupling with Bulgaria, so Bulgaria is lagging behind. Since this year, Romania has overtaken Croatia, which one would have probably thought impossible 19 years ago. So Croatia had a GDP per capita which was almost double than Romania, and we see Austria growing fast and steady, so maintaining the gap with the European averages. So I think overall Romania has been a successful story. We see storms coming up now and then. It's inevitable. It's a volatile economy. It's a private sector driven economy. That means low government intervention by European standards. So I think we have reasons to be optimistic over the medium and long term. Thank you. Yeah.
All right, Katalin, thank you very much. A very condensed and compressed introduction into the macroeconomic situation here in Romania. Very well done, and very well shown the strong incline, so to say, of Romania, especially in GDP And I just wanted to kick in a short presentation about, or one slide about the GDP in the counties here in Romania. So this is Romania divided all over the counties, and it's a comparison of the counties, which way they keep up with other countries, for instance. So we see that Bucharest is the only white one, and the white means that it keeps up. It has the level of the GDP per capita. In PPP is the level of Spain, for instance. If we look into Timișoara, Cluj, Brașov, Prahova, Ilfov, or Constanța, we see that the GDP per capita in PPP keeps up the level with Hungary, for instance. All the blue ones that are more or less in the center of Romania or Arad, for instance, are keeping up with Russia, and all the green ones, they keep up with the average of Bulgaria, for instance. So we also see that orange means keeping up with Serbia, and red means matching the GDP per capita with Albania. Does that actually mean that Romanian development has been completely diverse? And what does it mean on the future development of Romania?
Thank you very much. That's a very good picture. Actually, we did a report which is called a systematic country diagnostic, which is on the site of the World Bank, which looked in more detail at this kind of comparisons, and we call that report the Tale of Two Romania. So what we actually see there, and the main message of that is that we see some regions charging ahead. We call them leading regions, while others actually are left behind. But the most important, this is actually, it's not uncharacteristic to development. So development is not uniform. It doesn't happen similarly across the country. So you see regions charging ahead, and there are some certain conditions that explain that. One is, for example, having a university in, we call this magnet cities. So having a university in a certain place, I think, does wonders, because it attracts a lot of qualified students. Those students do not go back to their countries of origin, and they actually contribute substantially to economic activity. So many of these regions actually are universities and are driven by university centers. They are also closer to markets. Romania is a country which exports, I think, significantly, and I think that being close to the destination countries helps as well. And they also benefit from most of them benefit from good infrastructure. So the better infrastructure is in that part of the country. Having said that, there will be other polls which expect that will actually be colored in sooner or later in blue, and one of them is Iași, for example, in the eastern part of the country. Iași doesn't have a great infrastructure, physical infrastructure, unfortunately, but is a very large and larger university center. So it developed services, and they are pretty competitive. There are a number of global players which have set base there. So they cannot export physically, but they can export services like software, for example, and the like. So you see that more and more visibly coming up. It's important that so Romania is growing. That means that there are leading regions that grow fast, but also the lagging regions are growing. So discrepancies are widening, but we cannot really say that there are countries or regions actually which are going backwards.
If we now head rather for a crisis, let's say this, is it going to be a soft landing? Is it going to be a hard landing? Is it going to be a long-term base that we're looking for?
Well, the way I presented things, which may be an optimistic perspective, but traditionally I'm more optimistic. I don't think that there will be a serious crisis. I think there will be a slowdown in the most likely scenario, and an eventual pickup somewhere. But this is under assumption that there will be no major exogenous shocks taking place somewhere, let's say in Europe. I think Europe is vulnerable, and some countries are particularly vulnerable. So if there is a shock in a large European economy, that would send tremors towards the other members, and everybody will suffer, including Romania. So Romania, because of the economic structure of the country, because of the reliance on the functioning of the market, has a high average growth, but also has a volatile growth. So probably if one does understand that deviation of growth over the last 30 years, I would not be surprised to see that is the highest in the EU as well. So that means that
talking about a high average growth, if we talk about it, in Romania, we always hear that the population is shrinking. So we look here at the GDP per capita, which is also reflects the shrinking of the population. But what does it mean on the growth number of something like of a country like Romania in terms of a shrinking population? How much influence is there?
That is a serious problem, and I said earlier, probably the most serious for the medium and short run, because I don't see these labor shortages and skills shortages going away. On the contrary, my expectation that they are going to become increasingly acute, because in general, labor market trends are long-term trends, and demographic trends are very, very difficult to correct in the medium or short run. So clearly, this constraints growth. So if you look at growth accounting, and in the report which I was mentioning earlier, we've done growth accounting. So looking at the contributions of various factors to growth, you will see that the contribution of labor has been negative, and I think that is going to continue to be negative, unfortunately, for a while. So what do we do? How do we respond to that challenge? I think that there are several ways. One is to put more emphasis on skills as much as possible. And here I would encourage companies to come into contact with the universities so that they actually establish partnerships and they prepare the future labor force for themselves. I think there are successful cases. I know several of them where actually companies, serious investors have been very active in pursuing interns, students, and so on, and that's the way they were able to grow. Second, you may want to import labor, and there are various schemes. A lot of countries in the world do that. Some in more orderly manner, some in more disorderly manner. Then there is a pool of labor in the countryside, which can be tapped. Unfortunately, doesn't have a solid skill weight, skill composition. But I think that closer attention to access of the rural population to the labor market.
Catalin, wonderful. Thank you very much. I guess this was a very broad, very condensed, and very compressed overview about the macroeconomic development. I think a really good introduction into everything, seeing also that the regional differences are quite big in Romania. And from there, I guess we want to go on. Thank you very much, Catalin, for being here with me. And we want to go on right now with a statement from Horia Braun-Erdei. Horia Braun-Erdei is chief economist with BCR, Banca Comercială Română. Thanks very much for accepting the challenge to follow up another chief economist. I hope we don't have the chief economist overkill today. And let us see a bit more from a bank's view, where a bank is kind of also a pre-indicator, a preliminary indicator. And let us see how the banks see the development. Your clicker, and the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Horia Braun. I'm the chief economist of BCR, part of Erste Group. I'm going to talk today tonight a little bit about how we see the future of the Romanian economy in terms of possible scenarios. As Catalin also mentioned, we are facing significant uncertainties both in the global economy and in the local economy in terms of local macroeconomic policies. And I think that the scenario analysis is the best to capture the potential trends that we will see in the near future. I will start with where I think the Romanian economy is positioned today. It's a little bit like a ski jumper in the air, in my view. And the reason for that is the graph that you see in this slide, which compares the evolution of real wages with the evolution of real productivity growth. Obviously, these two metrics should be quite well correlated, and ideally, wage growth should not surpass productivity growth. However, in the Romanian economy, now switching a little bit to nominal terms, in the last 5 years, so since 2013 until 2018, Wages have grown quite significantly, driven by mainly by policies of the government. Public sector wages basically doubled in the last 5 years. Minimum wages also doubled in the last 5 years. Private sector wages grew by 60%, a little bit lower, but obviously quite a high number as well. Whereas when we look on the other side, on the productivity side, the expansion has been accumulative below 50%, so lower. Let's say that we had a little bit of currency depreciation, but only 5%. This helped a little bit with the competitivity of our exports. However, there is still a significant gap between the evolution of these two metrics, and this seems to continue into 2019. Our projections are that wages overall will grow by 11.7%, driven mainly again by public sector wages 17% and private sector wages by 10%, whereas the expansion of productivity probably will not be higher than 3% in real terms, which in let's say nominal terms would be 6 or 7%. So the gap remains there. And the reflection of this gap is that we have a clear expansion of the twin deficits. So the deficit of the current account and the budget deficit. You see that in the slide, the graph on the slide. And this basically opens up the outlook for basically a landing. So the ski jumper at the end of the day will have to land, and the skills, I think, are shown of the sportsman is when he lands, and not necessarily when she or he takes off. So I will explore a little bit the options for this landing, but just one remark: there's not necessarily something wrong with having deficits as long as somebody is financing them. So the Romanian consumption boom has been to some extent financed, let's say in years 2017, 2018, on the one hand by a quite sanguine expansion of exports as well, which were financing the imports, which are fueling or are filling in for the lack of domestic production and fulfilling the demands of the consumers. On the other hand, the financing also came from financial markets, and in 2017-18, generally in the last years, the financial market was more than willing to finance countries such as Romania, obviously for a given price and a given risk premium, but the money is out there in the market. There is abundant liquidity, especially in the major markets, and also emerging markets have shown quite significant inflows. So this is the situation from the last couple of years, but I think the scenarios for the Romanian economy will depend a lot on two coordinates: how the evolution of the Eurozone economy will look like, because this will impact the evolution of our exports, especially our manufacturing sector. How the financial markets will approach risky assets, and Romania is one of the emerging markets, hence is part of this emerging market risky asset complex. Also, domestically, in order to start tackling these deficits, definitely the fiscal policy will need to change strategy and move from an expansionary fiscal policy towards a much tighter fiscal policy. If this does not happen, so if the government continues to expand the fiscal deficit, and we get into a situation where the fiscal deficit will exceed 3% of GDP, taking the Romanian economy in an excessive deficit procedure, and if along with that we see a further deterioration of the global economy and much more significant worsening of risk sentiment in global markets, then I'm afraid that the hard landing scenario becomes a plausible one. And a hard landing scenario, I think we in Romania have lived a couple of those, so we know how it looks like. it eventually leads to financial institution, international financial institution support, such as the World Bank, but also the IMF and the European Commission, and it would be also reflected in a worsening of the rating of the country, and obviously the financial assets would deteriorate in terms of price. Exchange rate would have to depreciate significantly, and interest rates would also have to rise significantly. This is not our main scenario, but under the assumptions that I mentioned, it does not have an immaterial probability, let's say. On the other hand, if we move into the other side, let's say, the more optimistic side, more optimistic extreme, the global economy, as also Catalin mentioned, the outlook for the global economy is a little bit of a slowdown in 2019, but after that, in 2020, we go back to the growth rate that we saw in 2018, and there could be also some positive surprises in terms of the growth. Right now, growth is being held down a lot by uncertainties related to the international trade network, the US-China trade tensions, but these could dissipate in let's say a horizon of 1 to 2 years. I'm not saying that this is my main scenario, but it's not an improbable one. And in that context, if the Romanian authorities also change the type of strategy that they are pursuing, and they're switching from more consumption-driven growth towards more investment-driven growth, then in that case, probably we would be able to see the kind of growth rates that the government is actually projecting, 5%. Maybe 5% is a little bit too high, but 4 to 5% is something that is doable, especially that we still have ahead of ourselves the backlog of EU funds absorption that still needs to come in this EU budget cycle. The middle ground, I would say, is the most likely scenario in my view. I concur in that respect to Catalin's outlook. It's more of a soft landing scenario, but again, depends a lot on the assumptions with respect to the global economy and global markets on the one hand, and on the other hand on the fiscal policy. Currently, the outlook for the global economy is of a slowdown, especially that basically a lot of major economies have been growing above potential. So it's a little bit normal to expect lower growth rates. Also, financial markets probably grew too fast in the last couple of years. So I would not expect that, let's say, risky assets or equities will show similar expansion in the next couple of years. In that context, Romania will need to adopt some adjustment measures. The government already attempted to do this a little bit. They came with a deficit target initially of 2.5% compared to this year's 2.9%. And basically, in this context, if this happens, then the soft landing scenario is a much more likely scenario, with interest rates not having to rise significantly. The exchange rate indeed would have to depreciate, and but not very much. And in terms of growth rates, what we are expecting is numbers of around 3% indeed for this year and for the next year. But obviously we have election years, which would complicate a little bit the situation. I would stop here, and maybe a question from Gerd, I think.
All right, wonderful, Horia. Thank you very much for talking about the elections. There is actually going to be 4 elections coming up: the European parliamentarian elections, the presidential election, the local elections, and then last but not least, the parliamentarian elections. So they're going to have a lot of influence, but they're going to also have a lot of influence onto the government policy. And talking about government policy, I may go over to one slide that you've seen here. It's also like what were the developments that actually happened in the counties, and yeah, how strong is the economy in the countries combined with the European Union funds? You said there's a lack of absorption of European Union fund absorption. But if we talk now about the different counties, and we see it on this slide here, let's talk a bit about it. We have countries with a very high trade deficit. We have countries with exactly the opposite. They have a trade surplus, a very high one. And we see that especially Timișoara, for instance, Sibiu, Alba Iulia, or also Craiova and Pitești are having a very high surplus, whereas Ilfov, Prahova, Bucharest, and Constanța have a very high deficit. Where do you think does that come from? What does that mean for the Romanian economy?
Probably it's a little bit related to the issue of infrastructure, because you see that the trade surplus is in those counties which are a little bit closer to the western border, and which have lack of or less of a constraint coming from the lack of infrastructure, whereas other counties, especially northeast part of Romania, their infrastructure is a big liability. And actually, when I mentioned the EU funds absorption, on average absorption rate is in line, let's say, with the EU average broadly. But where we are behind is exactly the large infrastructure program. This is where the biggest gap is.
Talking about lagging behind, you talked a lot about the wages and the development of the wages. Did the wages more or less always lag behind? Is it just like a normal process that the wages actually pick up right now?
Well, if we look back 5 years ago, probably there was a negative gap which should have been filled, because after the crisis there was subdued wage growth, whereas productivity has been growing still strongly. But at some point we lost track of how much really wages have to grow, and now it's become a mantra and not a very well thought through policy with a long-term strategic objective in the country. So unfortunately, this is probably also related to the electoral cycle, so we might not have to review this until 2021.
Before the election is after the election, after the election is before the election. So this might come up again. I guess one thing that we have to say is that Romania, sometimes we get a feeling, is having an outside view as well, not only an inside view. We get the feeling that Romania doesn't see itself in the international competition, and I guess that is one thing that one should do, because Romania was one of the strongest nearshoring markets in Europe besides Serbia, and is losing this position right now. Horia, thank you very much for all your presentation and all the details you gave to us. And yeah, to our viewers in Austria, we want to go on right now, getting it down from the macroeconomic level, from the meta level, with World Bank coming via a bank, seeing like the whole picture all over Romania. We would like to get a bit further down into kind of a company, a big company that actually has to do long-term investments for several years. Actually, you talk about decades. If you do the investment decision now, you need the business environment. So we would also like to ask Laurian Lungu from OMV Petrom to be with us and to speak a bit about the business environment and what you actually need in order to be able to have the business environment you need for long-term decisions for the next decades. Laurian, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Laurian Lungu. I'm an economic advisor for OMV Petrom. Well, I've been an economic advisor for them for more than 10 years now. And we've also set up recently a think tank, an economic policy think tank, Consumer Policy Advisors Group, which aims at improving the quality of economic debate in Romania. With this, I'll just, I prepared a few slides. So first is that actually when looking at what's going to happen, I think it's always helpful to look back. And I think one useful information is that actually Romania has had an economic cycle now of 9 years. So this is the 9th year, nine consecutive years in which Romania registered economic growth. So this is the second time after 1989 when Romania has such a long cycle of growth. And obviously, as this cycle sometimes come to an end. So it shouldn't be a surprise that in the near future, the economy will slow down. We might even get into a small recession. We never know, because it also is going to depend on the situation in Europe, the US, and so on. But just keep this growth perspective in mind. Second is that actually the growth potential in Romania remains pretty solid. But for this to happen, I just put down three preconditions. First is this recalibration of macro imbalances, which you've heard from the previous speakers. So they relate to fiscal and the current account deficits, which are growing. Then the labor market asymmetries. We have a tight labor market and so on. Second is this policy. The fiscal monetary policy mix should get much better. It's at the moment they are just running one against the other. Really, I mean, they're not supportive. In a good economy, actually, these two policies support themselves. So to get better effects in the economy, in order to sustain, obviously, long-term growth. And the third one is reducing this legislative uncertainty. For companies which operate in Romania, they know that things can change really overnight, as was the case with the latest emergency ordinance, which was passed last year, at the end of last year. So essentially, these sort of measures, they affect the private sector quite deeply. This creates a state of uncertainty and obviously will stall investments, private sector investments. Now, looking ahead, over the last years, and I will show you this in the last slide, Romania had consumption was the main growth engine. This partially was stimulated by growth of the minimum wage and the wage in the private sector. But this cycle has now come to an end, or at least it's very close to an end. So the engine of growth must change in the future if Romania is going to, if the Romanian economy is going to maintain this pace of growth. This should come either from investment or from higher net exports. Now, looking at the risk, at the risks ahead, the EU economy is going to play a large part in how much Romania's future growth is going to be, because we've seen that after 2008, and when the EU slowed down, of course, Romania follows suit. And also the amplitude of the economic cycle, it's much higher in Romania compared to the average EU. So on the next graph, you see here actually the contribution of GDP of consumption to GDP growth, which is the green bar there, has been slowing down over the last years. Right? So looking back at 2015, you can see that actually the contribution of consumption was the main engine of growth, right? And this continued throughout 2018, well, 2017, I would say. And then from 2018, you can see a bigger gap. So essentially, GDP growth was still higher than consumption growth. But of course, 2018 was a bit of an odd year, so we had a very good agricultural year. But if you remove that, if you take this out, then looking forward, you may see well, something else kicking in, okay? like investment or net exports in order to maintain the pace of growth. Now, I would focus on because the time is limited, on just one aspect, which is very important for the companies, actually, which is labor costs. So essentially what you see here is the real wage growth over the last 10, 11 years, 9 years, 8, 9 years. Actually, it tells the same story like you've seen in the previous presentation. It's just that you don't have the growth rate here. It's just the well, they are together actually, but the idea was to show that public sector wage growth, which is taken here as a proxy of the non-traded sector, and you compare this with the industry wage growth, which is a proxy for the traded sector. So you can see that actually the wages in the traded sector were forced actually to follow suit, because you had a migration from the traded sector to the public sector, given that the public sector was paying higher wages. But of course, when you compete in European markets, you have to be, as a private company, you need to pay huge attention to the costs. So I think the wages are just one side of the story, because we've been talking about the tightness of the labor market, the lack of skills, and so on. I think what it matters is also the quality of life. Right? So you can offer higher wages as a company, but in the end, it's the quality of life that matters most for the employees of that company. So they should have proper roads to go to work, or good education, okay, for their kids, or a decent healthcare service. So this all matters. Until these are fixed in some way, I do not think that wages alone can release the tensions in the labor market. This on the next slide, there is a regional view on the wages. Over the last years, this is the period you see there is 2008 and 2018, and you can see that wages in Romania grew the fastest rate. On the first column, you see minimum wage in euro per month, and then second is the average annual growth rate. But what's important is if you look at the third column, which actually compares wages across the region in terms of purchasing power standards. So actually, what you see there is that Romania now has the second. Well, actually, it had this data is from July 2018. It had the second highest wage in across the region, the second highest minimum wage across the region. So which is quite high given I would say this quality of life, right? And so I see little scope for pushing up wages further, given the lack of infrastructure, given the lack of healthcare service, of the quality healthcare service, and so on. And looking ahead, I just single out a few points here, because I was just thinking of a medium to long term challenges. Okay, what this could be. The potential growth still stands at about 3.54%. So Romanian economy can grow at this rate over the last years, but if the right policies are implemented. So there is really a need for investment in all these sectors: roads, energy, the energy sector, healthcare, and so on. But the quality, this is the crux of the problem. The quality of economic policies need to improve. You cannot have so much legislative instability, which affect labor markets, which affect cash flows of the companies, like really overnight. Especially for companies which need long-term investments. Then the fiscal and the regulatory solutions, they need to create an even playing field. At the moment, this field is uneven, so they favor some companies which operate in a public sector. So this is obviously not good, because at some point these restrictions must be removed. They are in contradiction with the EU laws. So then the situation could be much worse. And now, looking ahead at the two threats, which I see what the most important are for the budget deficit and also for the future of economic development, is that one is the pensions, the public sector pensions, which they are envisaged to grow at a quite fast rate over the next 2-3 years. And the second one is that the risk of national bank independence. So this could fall prey to political will. Yes, I have also a few forecasts here, but this you can see them on your own. Thank you.
Laurian, thank you very much. If I may start up with you taking in the questions, we got a lot of questions right now from the audience, from the viewers from our webinar. And we had a question which actually asked, like, is for a company like yours, a big company with a lot of capital, a strong company, that is powerful, is a crisis rather a threat, or is a crisis actually a chance on the market?
Well, yes, usually we've seen this as crisis as using an opportunity. So every crisis was an opportunity to actually act and to improve. But if you look at the legal, some new legislative changes, you cannot do anything about it, because essentially it just caps the gas prices, for instance. And for that, obviously, you need to have a long-term investment in order to extract the cash flow from an investments. I'm talking now about investments in the Black Sea. And for this reason, obviously, if you cap a gas price below the market clearing price, which exists nowadays, now this creates a huge problem. You cannot beat that. So essentially, we need to wait now for this restriction to be removed for the investment to make sense.
But does it make you slimmer? Does it make you faster? So you get out stronger after because it has to be kept for like 3 years, as we understand right now. It's being changed on a weekly basis, the regulation, but does it make you slimmer, faster, stronger afterwards?
This is the idea, yes. This is the idea. You need to be like agile. This is like the new word. Yes, you need to be a bit of agile. I mean, you have to resist to different market forces. But what I'm saying is that this sort of thing is just an artificial pressure, which already applies to other market pressures, which exist.
All right. What you've talked about, I want to show also some more food for thought. And this food of thought gives us squares with a lot of cubes inside. And the cubes inside, because it might not be that easy to read them. So I will tell you that the red cubes show the government spending in percentage. One block is a % of the total spending of the government spending. Left side is 2011, right side is 2016. So what it shows is that in 2011, the spending for the wages was rather low still, whereas in 2016, the spending for wages in percentage of the overall government spending was pretty high. Whereas the green one, the green cubes that we see there, are the spending for the investments. So spending for the investments by the government in percentage of the overall government spending has been taken down. I guess that creates kind of a difficult situation also for the companies, but you're moving and working in a private sector, so you should not be that much affected. But we could take up this for a discussion afterwards, I guess, later on. So Laurian, thank you very much for being here, and thank you for giving us the insight. And we can also pick up this slide a bit later on, but I would like to introduce right now Anca Negrescu. Anca Negrescu is another economist, as our fourth economist today. He gives us a different view, who might also give us the view on the future, going on a maternity leave, so to say, very soon. Can you give us kind of the view from UniCredit Bank in Romania? What is your view on the macroeconomic development of Romania?
Thank you. Dear Mr. Councillor, distinguished guests, and dear colleagues, as we've been used to, Romania keeps oscillating in between being the wonder child and the problem child of the European classroom. And after being praised for correcting the macroeconomic imbalances after the financial crisis with the help of the IMF, Romania seems to have forgotten its past mistakes and is currently on the verge of repeating them. As the speakers before have mentioned, the most recent economic data points towards a slowdown in global trade and in global economic growth expectations. At the same time, several risks have emerged, the most important of them being, in our view, Brexit and the risk of a recession in the US in 2020. As is usually the case, any spike in the risk appetite can dent investor sentiment and can affect the CE region. The countries regarded as the most vulnerable and their currencies would be hit the most in such a scenario. So, if you may, the following period could be like the story of the three little pigs who have built their houses of different materials. We have straws, sticks, and bricks. And in the following period, we might find out what Romania's house was built of. In our view, the resilience of the CE economies will depend on three main factors. The first factor is the dependency on foreign capital inflows. The second factor is the strength of private consumption. And the third factor is the scope for monetary and fiscal stimuli. Now let's take a look at how Romania fares in terms of the three to ascertain more about its current position. Starting from the first factor, the wage-led growth strategy of the past years, although it assured a high growth of wages and of social security income, it failed to assure that the production side gets the necessary investments and keeps up the pace in order to satisfy this additional demand. As a consequence, we had a 70% increase in the trade deficit in 2018 versus the previous year, and an increase in the current account balance by 60% during the same period. And this is due to the very high imports that went way ahead of the exports. So a current account deficit that is as high as Romania's. In 2018, Romania's current account deficit was the second highest in the CE region. This is not a problem per se, but it needs to be covered by the stable inflows of capital. And by stable inflows of capital, I'm referring to EU funds and foreign direct investments. And if we take a look on the following slide, we see that the pink portion, which is the current account deficit, is not covered by the sum of the gray portions. Thus, the red line is negative. This means that we actually have net outflows from the country. And on a regional comparison, we see that Romania has the weakest position in terms of that, which means that it will remain dependent on speculative foreign capital. This means that the RON, if we will have an overshooting of risk, of the external risks I was mentioning, the RON will be exposed to depreciation pressures. So for the following years, we expect the euro-RON pair to remain on a gradual upward trend. We do not expect a sharp jump, but we see a depreciation in between 6 and 10% during the following 5 years of the RON. The second factor I was mentioning is the strength of private consumption. And although we see that private consumption remains the main growth factor of Romania, its strength is weakening, and it is expected to weaken during the following years as well. And this is due to the fact that households have decreased their purchasing expectations while increasing their savings. In terms of the third factor, the scope for monetary and fiscal stimuli, here we know, as the speakers tonight have already informed us, we know that the space is limited. On the monetary side, we have high inflation that cannot allow for significant monetary stimulus, while on the fiscal side, we have very high budget spending commitments that will limit the space. As a conclusion, neither of the three factors provides reasons of optimism, to say so. And it seems that memory doesn't serve our country right, because for the time being, it chose to reverse the progress made after the financial crisis. However, with a little bit of structural reforms, we believe that Romania can become again the star child. And this is due to the real potential of the country and all the opportunities that it has to offer to foreign investors. And in our view, a ray of optimism could come from infrastructure. Here, a simple example is that by linking the eastern part of the country to the rest of the country through a network of highways, we would unlock 36% of Romania's unemployed workforce. This would boost the potential of the country. And as we already saw in the past, we have the example of Constanța, after Constanța was linked to Bucharest, its GDP growth almost doubled its pace in comparison to the growth pace of the country overall. So it's a clear link in between the development of infrastructure and potential growth. And you might think that I'm too optimistic, but looking at the recent past of Romania, and also at the example of other countries such as Poland, this can be achieved. And for example, in Romania, during 2007, in between 2007 and 2014, the number of kilometers of highway has tripled. This performance could be repeated in the future. So, in order to conclude, as you know, a problem child requires will, vision, and patience from its educators. Romania requires vision and will from politicians and patience from its investors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anka. Thanks very much. It was a very interesting presentation, and you came actually in the end to a topic which is very interesting for us, because we got the questions from a few viewers who said, like, is Romania still an FDI destination? Should you still invest, foreign direct investment destination? Should you still invest as an Austrian company in Romania, or are the good times over?
No, the good times are not over, but we have episodes and episodes, to say so. We have boosts of growth, and then we take a break, maybe take a few steps backwards, but we will have another boost, no worries. So I believe that Romania remains a good destination for investments.
All right. Do you, as in UniCredit, do you see Romania as developing as one country, or do you say that for investments there are certain counties, certain counties which are more interesting than others to invest? I don't know, based on labor force availability, based on potential domestic growth?
In my view, the key would be infrastructure, as I mentioned during the presentation, because now the regions that were enjoying the infrastructure or were closer to the markets that we serve have already developed to their potential. So in order to unlock further potential, there are needed some investments and some structural measures, to be honest.
All right, thank you very much. Anka, I might just ask you back into the podium, so to say, to our other speakers. First of all, I want to say thank you very much to all the speakers for giving the presentations. I'm fully aware that we actually overshoot the time right now. We're already like 10-15 minutes behind the schedule. So it was much more interesting than we thought. There's much more to say than we thought. And I will return with a question about the counties, the interesting counties, to our speakers afterwards. But I wanted to kick in one slide, which might be a bit of a surprise for most of the people. And the slide is, that's what you get out of the website that you work with. And it's the website of Gert Hofstede. Gert Hofstede looks into the cultural dimensions of different countries and the people in the different countries, because it's the people who make a country. And we compared Austria, Poland, Romania, and Russia. Actually, it was planned to go into a discussion with this, because I think it's very much valid as kind of a basis of discussion. But I just wanted to give you a short overview into what it means, understanding Romania better, the cultural dimensions. Gert Hofstede, it's a website. You can go on the website, and you can actually, the website is, the source is on the slide. You can actually go there, and you will see that they talk about power distance, they talk about individualism, masculinity, uncertainty, avoidance of a certain country and a culture, and long-term orientation and indulgence. And what that actually means is, in terms of power distance, the acceptance of hierarchy, it's the acceptance of powers. It means that Romania and Romanians very much accept powers, they very much accept authorities and what is being decided for them, whereas Austrians, as we see, does not accept it at all. We always question it. We always question the power. We always question the authorities. But if we get kind of an explanation that's good enough for us, then we'll respect it. If you come to individualism, one sees that Romania is a very collectivist society. This also expresses itself by being Romanians being very family-oriented people. If we go further and we look at the masculinity actually means if the masculinity is very much, so to say, with very high value, like you see from Austria, it actually means that you live to work, you love to work. In Romania, where the level is rather low, it actually means that you work to live. It's the other way around. So we also see a consensus of solidarity in there. In terms of uncertainty avoidance, we see very, very high values with Romania, which means Romanians rather go into certain areas and into certain kind of settings. If there is uncertain times, beliefs are being created to get everything a bit more certain again. So I just would like to remind our webinar viewers that they can switch the cameras that we have, because I'm also going to move away from this camera right now. We're going to be over in the other camera. And I would like to open up the question one more time to our speakers, leaving this slide just up there, but not referring to the slide. I would just like to open up to our speakers, and maybe we start up with Catalin Pauna, because World Bank has done extremely good studies on that, based on the regions. Is Romania a good destination for foreign direct investments still? And if yes, are there countries which are more kind of more attractive for foreign direct investments than other countries?
Thank you very much, Gerd. So, as I was saying also in my presentation, I think Romania is an excellent, if one takes a long-term view, Romania is an excellent destination for FDI, because returns have been fantastic. So if you know how to manage your business in Romania with those kind of growth rates we've seen over the last 15-20 years, clearly the returns must have been spectacular, beyond what you actually would get in mature markets. But this is a rather general question, so I think a lot more nuances are need to be put on it. Like for example, there are, as I was mentioning, there are regions which actually are charging ahead in terms of attracting, sophisticating the type of investment which is intensive in technology, like the ITC. ITC is the sector, for example, which is fastest growing in Romania in double digits, and is one of the also fastest growing in terms of exports. So this is an area where Romania is doing well, and my expectation is going to do better and better. We're already, I think, in top 5 in terms of value added in GDP in the European Union. So I see Romania even actually advancing in that particular ranking. So clearly there are opportunities in many areas, but there's a different question if you are thinking, for example, of labor-intensive industries. I don't know, like textile industries. So clearly there are parts of Romania where wages are still low, and you can actually, probably consider, investing in more labor-intensive. But as the country converges towards European averages in terms of GDP per capita, living standards, productivity, and so on, clearly the structure of the economy changes as well. So we see a more capital intensive industries becoming more attractive, productivity driven, like I said, innovation, and so on. So clearly, I think we need to go deeper in answering this question, deeper into the understanding better the context in which probably the person in the audience was asking it. So clearly, overall, I think I'm positive. Romania has a higher growth potential than most of the countries in the region. I was showing you the graph. So where Romania overtook Croatia, and I think the next in line is probably Hungary in a few years' time, if we believe the most likely scenarios which we put on the table. I think it is worth putting the money into Romania. But take a long-term perspective. Wait for the returns to come. Don't expect significant returns in the short run, because it's not going to happen.
All right, wonderful. Thank you very much, Catalin. We're playing a bit here with the microphone in order for all our webinar watchers to be with us. And I would like to pick up one question from the audience, and I would actually like to combine it with the second question a bit more. So how do you see the outlook for the oil and gas industry? That's the question that came in from the audience. The question I would like to ask you, we said now, are there some countries more competitive in attracting foreign direct investments? Looking at you, you're an international company, multinational, you got explorations, you got downstream in many different countries. Is Romania in competition with the other countries when it comes to investment? You say your legal framework changes. Would you take money off from Romania, and would you invest it rather in Norway or in other countries?
Well, the oil and gas industry is very competitive. So you have big players which have a global reach, and for them, they can operate with lower markups because they can balance the risk across global regions. So from this point of view, Romania is quite interesting. Why? Because the nature of the reserves, they've been exploited for a long time. So they have mature reserves at the moment. These are very costly to extract. So if it was not for the OMV, for instance, which brought Petrom back in 2004, and then for the joint ventures which they made with Exxon and so on, in terms of bringing technology, to take out the oil cheaper, then obviously probably Romania would have been non-competitive. Now looking ahead, we have this discoveries, in the Black Sea, the natural gas there, but again, which was possible using technology, really, 3D exploration and so on.
All right. When you talk about technology, I guess that what you actually talk about is productivity, meaning barrel per or US dollars per barrel that you pay to extract it. So is just maybe being able to hand over the question also to Horia, is productivity one of the keys for Romania to be more successful and more attractive?
Well, it is one of the factors to, first of all, to afford the kind of wage growth that we mentioned that has happened, and given the tight labor markets, it's also likely that wages, there will be a continuous pressure on wages looking forward, and in that context, productivity is really important. Also, there is clearly a productivity gap. We don't rank very well when we compare wage growth to productivity growth across CE countries. So not talking about Western countries, developed countries, but when compared to CE countries, we are one of the worst in terms of wages per productivity. And the productivity factor is the one which is weighing a lot down. So in terms of level of productivity, we have to make up a lot. But this also creates a potential because this creates the playing field for investments in technology, which could be rewarded with improved efficiency and improved productivity.
All right, having overshot already by quarter of an hour, I guess we come to one last statement, which I ask you to rather keep it short, and I would like Anka to take over the question that we have now on the screen. The question that was asked, how do you see the needs and potential of digitalization of the public and private sectors? Is digitalization maybe the wonder that can actually boost growth in Romania again?
Yes, I believe that an increasing number of industries is starting to rely on that, including the banking industry. And I believe that this will be the focus of the following years. And indeed, this can help with the number of employees that is quite low and the limited workforce. And at the same time, we need to use our IT capacities because we have a significant number of professionals within the industry.
All right, wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anka Negrescu, Unicredit Bank. Horia, last statement. Do we look into a gloomy future, into some kind of bright future? Do we look into a big dark space?
I would actually pick up one of the questions that I saw, how to thrive in turbulent times. I think especially what we had last year, the Emergency Ordinance 114, for us, the banking sector, demonstrated the value of dialogue. So we need to continuously employ a dialogue with the authorities, with all the stakeholders in the economy, in order to reach a common goal, which in our case was the increase of the financial intermediation.
All right, thank you very much, Horia. Katalin, famous last words?
Yeah, I'm going to try to also respond to one of the questions, which is about the digitalization of the public sector. I think that we are doing fine on the private sector side, and I'm very happy with the way that the private sector has evolved in Romania. I think the Achilles heel for this country is is the quality of decision making by the public sector. And I think that we need substantially better linkages between results and resources in the allocation of public resources. And I think digitalization is one necessary step to be taken. We've seen it happening in many countries in the region. I think Romania is lagging behind in terms of using evidence, solid evidence for taking policy decision, and I think this is where I would concentrate significantly more effort if I were part of the administration.
All right, wonderful. Thank you very much, Katalin Pauna from World Bank, and Laurian Lungo, VPETROM. Your last statement for the webinar?
Well, I would say that you cannot fight technology. So if you look at the shale gas evolution, no, you cannot fight this. So the idea is to embrace it, and this will be to exploit a great potential for Romania. I mean, to apply it, to actually across all industries, not all oil and gas, obviously, and this could be like a booster for economic growth.
All right, wonderful. Thank you very much. I'll take the microphone with me, and I hope all the webinar viewers, they actually excuse me for having the microphone in my hand. There were some questions which actually referred to what do you have to do to be successful. I just wanted to say, I guess the Austrian economy the Austrian businesses were always successful here in the Romanian economy, and I hope that we're going to continue to be successful in the economy, and by this also helping Romania to develop even better than they did up to now in the last few years and last decade. But actually taking up the comments of someone else, and we had a discussion beforehand as well, taking up what do you have to do? Diversify the markets, diversify the business suppliers and customers. So also diversifying in Romania is an option, it's a possibility, it's a big market, and it's a strong domestic market. So seize the opportunities of diversification in this market here. One option is always do what you do best, stick to what you do best, and have reserves. Avoid over-indebtedness. What we hear right now are the indicators that for especially small and medium-sized enterprises are kind of in terms of debt levels at rather high debt levels. So try to avoid the debt levels, have room to move. You might get out stronger than out of a crisis than into the crisis. One thing that we can only recommend, having the experience from us from Advantage Austria, or the Außenwirtschaftscenter Bucharest here, is have an eye on the debt collection. Always stick to the debt collection. Don't forget about it. And one thing that we had in all the discussions, and that we found out from management studies from Target Executive Group, was also develop and employ more female managers. They're way better in managing and in leadership in Romania in certain areas, and one should actually seize the opportunities. So by this, I thank all the webinar viewers to stick with us. I know that we overshoot by 20 minutes in this webinar, but I hope it was interesting for you. And I hope to have you back again with the next webinar that we're going to have in September about business intelligence. Business intelligence is going really deep into business intelligence, not only market research. And with this, I would like to remind you that this webinar is going online on our YouTube channel, the Außenwirtschaft Austria YouTube channel. And the presentations, they're going to go out on via email and onto our web server. So thank you very much for being with us. Thank you very much to the speakers for being with us. Have a good evening. All the best from Bucharest. Goodbye.